I think that's mechanically an easier thing to adopt when you put yourself in positions where you have to work with the public. It almost kind of teaches you how to show confidence. But when it comes to the inward confidence, I really want to talk about that because it's something that you can kind of hide from the world. And in some small ways, it may change the way that you behave towards yourself and talk to yourself and pursue your own goals. Whereas with the outward confidence, it's almost like a instant gratification, because if you show the confidence, you do the job well, then you'll have a positive outcome from the situation. But I think it just goes to show too how whether you're faking it or working on that and you acknowledge I think that working in the direction of finding that confidence can only help promote more positive situations for yourself.
Welcome to Season 5 of the Drawing from Experience podcast.
Your source of relatable advice for the everyday artist.
We want you to pick up your pencils, pick up your paintbrush,
pick up your instrument, or whatever it is that you create with. Because let's face it,
this world is so much better with your art in it.
Whether you're an artist looking for more inspiration,
or an art enthusiast that loves to hear about the creative process,
you've come to the right place.
My name is Shane Izykowski.
And I'm Stefania Mederios.
And this is the Drawing from Experience podcast. Hello, you beautiful humans. This is Shane Izykowski. I am doing an intro solo here. Stefania is actually traveling and doing some work. So I just want to very quickly introduce this episode of the podcast. Is number 130. This is the second confidence episode. If you go back and listen to Gaining Self-Confidence, episode number 65, that was one of my solo episodes way back when. This is the part 2 of that episode, but it is entirely different. But I do recommend going back and listening to episode number 65 because it has some of these thoughts that we talk about today. But today we do a deep dive into how we feel about, if we consider ourselves confident, and we kind of have a back and forth about that. And we really get into the weeds about how it feels to be confident and not confident, and why, and dealing with things like shame and humiliation and things like that. So without further ado, here is my discussion with Stefania about gaining self-confidence.
I have a question for you, Shane.
Sure. Let's hear it.
Do you consider yourself a confident person?
I believe personally, I feel like I can be very confident in certain things, but I, like most other people, have confidence issues depending on what we're talking about, So there's times when I go, I'll talk to other artists or whatever, and when I speak to them about art and things, I feel very confident when I'm explaining things. But it usually has to do with how secure I am, or how much I know, how much knowledge I have about a certain topic. If I don't know anything about it, or it's a little spotty or a little gray of how much I actually know, it's really hard for me to pretend like I know, and I have this confidence about it. I can't confidently speak about, say, even art history, because I didn't really grow up learning art history. I didn't really put too much stake in it when I was learning about art and stuff. So I don't really confidently talk about that, and for people who listen to the show, well, they'll know that because I don't really talk too much about that. But yeah, but what about you?
So following up with your answer, the reason I asked that is because from what I know about you, you have a very strong outward confidence. And
well, thank you.
You're welcome. And I'd like to say that I wouldn't say I have as great of confidence as you do, but I would say my outward confidence is pretty okay. I can navigate through the world and appear confident, but the key word there is appear. And personally, I don't view myself as an inherently confident person.
Do you feel like your outward appearance of being confident, I mean, it's basically like a facade so you can get through your day and feel better about your interactions with people?
Thinking about it, I've asked myself, like, am I putting on a facade by exuding confidence? But when I think about situations where I am confident, it's for my students or for
Mm,
anyone who's looking up to me. And I like to make sure that if I'm sharing something with a student or if I'm teaching them something, I want them to know or think I'm confident so that they can feel confident in the information they're getting. And when I flip this into inward confidence, I think about my own personal drive as an artist and some of the limitations I might put on myself due to lack of confidence. So I also want to turn this around back on you and ask you, because in a
mhm.
social setting, you're confident, but when it
Yeah.
comes to creating your own art or the all of the moments between
Mm.
thinking of what to create, creating it, and then putting your work out there, do you feel as though you run into roadblocks when it comes to being confident?
I think most of the confidence issues I do have end up being because of a lot of like the external validation that I'm seeking by putting art out into the world and hoping people like it. And then if that response isn't what I think it's going to be, then my confidence like goes out the window about it. Then I question if the artwork's good. It's funny. It's like for the most part, I everything I put out into the world as far as my art is concerned, I'm like pretty happy about. I've thought about it. I've decided I'm going to put this out and whatever. But because I'm seeking so much, like, this is a thing that I did enjoy, and then I'm hoping that people like it. If it's not that experience, or like one or two people are like, oh, that's cool, like it doesn't feel like I'm getting the response that I thought I was going to get, but that happens so often. Like we end up putting this artwork out that we're like I really like how this came out or whatever. You have a confidence about it, and a lot of that confidence has just been gained over time of getting praise from other people. I mean, realistically, from day one when I started making artwork, I was getting praise from other people. This is well before social media. So, like, that aside, in general, like, I've always gotten a response out of people. So, like, it's not like I necessarily expect a great response all the time. Sometimes, in fact, I'll make a piece of artwork and I'm like, nobody's going to like this. I'm like, I like it, but I don't think anyone else is going to like it. But from day one, I've pretty much always gotten some kind of reaction out of people, and like art is the reason I used to make friends and all the things. So I ended up associating my artwork with getting some kind of validation from other people. And then from getting that praise and everything from other people, it's developed a lot of confidence in what I can do because I know I could do it. And I know that in the past, historically, I've gotten a certain reaction out of people. So it is like I'm not immune to feeling disappointed if I'm not getting the response. There's a lot of people who speak about that online where they're just like, you shouldn't have to care about what other people think or whatever. And like, it's almost impossible not to care at least a little bit, because like as artists, we need some kind of an audience to see the work afterwards, and that could be an audience that hates it, but at least you have an audience that's reacting to it in some way. So like, I don't know, like I've said this a lot, but just the cycle of creating artwork, you don't really complete that until it gets released to the world, to an audience for them to see. Like the entire cycle is not complete until somebody else at least knows that it exists, at least in my opinion. Other people might say otherwise. Like, people do artwork for different reasons, um, and they might just, a lot of people say like, hey, I'm just doing this art for myself, and that's totally fine. But I feel like it's not complete until there is some kind of an audience, because you end up learning from that experience regardless. Like, people teach me stuff about my art all the time, because sometimes you come up with ideas, and sometimes you don't know why, you came up with those ideas, and then you put them out, and someone else connects with them for a different reason, and then you start unpacking something that you might not have even put that much thought into. You're like, I like cuckoo clocks, so I'm going to put a cuckoo clock in here. And then somebody else sees that and they're like, oh, well, I had a cuckoo clock at my grandparents' house, but not many people actually have cuckoo clocks anymore. And then you're like, oh, that's true. And then they're like, whatever, it's attached to like a childhood memory, you know. I don't know why I'm bringing up cuckoo clocks, but it's just like you learn stuff from that, from talking to people about your own artwork that you created. And sometimes you don't know why. And then sometimes the meaning comes out of having those conversations with people, so it's not even always just like I'm looking for praise from everyone about my art so I could feel better about myself. Sometimes it's just literally like, what do you think about it? And that's why, like, when people come up and ask me like, oh, what's this piece about? Nowadays, I try really hard not to just be like, oh, it's about this, or this, because I like really want to hear what somebody thinks. And a lot of people are maybe like afraid to say what they think, or like afraid to look stupid, or they don't have the right art terms. It's like, it doesn't matter. Like, just literally, like, when you look at that, why are you asking me about it? You obviously have thoughts about it. So I want to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree too that the the end phase of creating is presenting it to that audience.
Yeah.
And so you would say that the outside validation plays an important role in your confidence though as an artist, right?
I think that's my very long-winded answer, is whether it's unfortunate or not, I'm not sure. Like, I think it's always been like that. So I think that I do rely on that in some way, like getting some kind of external reaction out of it is
Mm-hmm.
important to me. And that has built my confidence. It's
Right.
like when I get that kind of reaction out of somebody over the years, it just kind of like shows you that what you do can touch people a certain way, and whether
Right.
that's good or bad. Some people's reaction is, ugh. So it's whether it's good or bad, and then you can take that reaction and do whatever you want with it. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm sure over the years that you've gotten some kind of like confidence boost from somebody who's like, I love your work, right? I mean, I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen people praise you online. So,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting and listening to how like you've I don't know if inherited is the right word, but how your confidence has grown over time. It seems like that started for you at a younger point in life because you were creating at a younger phase.
yeah.
And it's almost like that seal has been broken. And you probably weren't actively thinking when you're at a younger age, like, what sort of validation will I receive from this? How will people respond? You were just creating to create, but then you received validation from friends, family, whatever that outside source was. And then that built up, that almost sent that gear into motion for you.
Yeah.
And I compare that to my scenario and probably the scenario of a lot of other people getting into art a lot later in life, and how that maybe that missing gear, or that now is where like adults, and now we think about these things consciously, when it comes to fear of failure, fear of succeeding or not succeeding. There's more room for us to worry about how we'll evolve as an artist, or how we'll do in the sense of how we'll receive validation for our work. And I think that's why perhaps like that might be a roadblock for a lot of people who may decide to pursue something a little later on. And that
Mm.
resonates with me as somebody who's gone into the game a little bit later. I now have all of these thoughts shifting around in my head that I wish that I could have knocked out at a younger age so that I can just move straight into creating.
Hmm. I see what you're saying. I guess what I would say to that, I don't know if you're looking for advice about that, or like how to maybe cope with some of those feelings. Would you like some advice about
Let's
that?
let's let's get some advice on that. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm so glad you're open to that. Um, as far as like coping with those feelings about maybe showing up later to the game, and trying to navigate it now, I hear a lot of artists talk about that. In fact, there's You know, there's artists that I've met that are like, I just started painting and, you know, and they're like 60 years old or something like that, you know, and they're not only are they like what they feel like is late to the game, they're also battling with the idea of like, oh, there's this whole other world of like social media. And now I have to like get on that or not or whatever. If they're even thinking about that, you know, generally what happens is people start making art. Generally speaking, people who end up becoming an artist like later on in life, what happens is they make something and then somebody in their life sees that and is like, you should do more of that, or you should hang this up at the cafe on the corner, or or somebody else who has some kind of resource like a cafe on the corner is like, I really like your stuff, you should hang it here. You know, that's what ends up happening. So some kind of external validation, you know, and then they start doing it, and then they start learning that there's all these other layers to being a professional artist. But still, like even at that level, they start like, generally, like if you ask that person what they do or whatever, or if you even ask them directly like, oh, are you an artist, they will be like, oh, I mean I make art, you know,
Yep.
like they don't even declare that they're an artist yet. So it takes a certain amount of time for them to even say, like, put the label on themselves as an artist. And and that's a confidence thing, you know.
Hmm.
It definitely is. Like, it's like I can't confidently say that I'm an artist. And in a room full of people, say at a gallery, what I find is when I talk to people during an opening or something like that, and I ask at an art show, I ask almost every single person that I meet if they're also an artist, or do you have work here or anything like that, you know. And the people who I get like the impression off them right off the bat, like that they are a creative person maybe, but they're really like, they don't want to say in a room full of artists that they're an artist, or they're like, oh, they're just like, yeah, I mean, I write sometimes, but you know, I don't like publish anything, or I paint every once in a while, or I used to paint. I don't really do it much anymore, and definitely not for like a show or anything like that, you know. So they're like afraid to even say it in front of what they construe as like a room full of professional artists,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm being called out right now because that's
Oh,
about where I'm at right now. I actually don't feel comfortable calling myself an artist.
whoa.
So it's funny you say that.
Okay.
And this is why I wanted to talk about confidence in this episode because I mean, for those of you who aren't familiar with both Shane and I as people, Shane has been working as a professional artist for much longer than I have, and I'm just getting into the game now. So we have conversations on a regular basis about like what makes us different and how our perspectives are so different. And I think that confidence is a really great topic to bounce between like somebody who has experienced this and may still be experiencing it and what that looks like to them now, and how I experience it as somebody who's on the other side of the spectrum just getting into this world. So, and that's why I love to talk about this.
So then let me ask you, okay, because you have been a professional artist, but just in a different industry, in a different part of the industry. So how do you feel about makeup, hair, all the artistry behind that? When somebody talks to you about those things, you're probably a lot more confident about those things than if somebody's like talking to you about a gallery show, right?
Yeah, I always get to throw a word in front of artist, so I'm a makeup artist. I am, and even, you know, when I was mentioning cosmetology in my intro episode, that's art too, but I
Mm.
don't have to walk around calling myself an artist. And I think that calling yourself an artist is almost establishing that line of this is how I view myself as a professional in what I do. And I think that confidence, at least in my perspective, plays a role in how I see myself as an artist, where I'm at right now with my experience, and how I might show up to other people, and if that term artist, you know, is valid in those scenarios. And it's silly because it's obviously I'm an artist, but I still have a lot of trouble vocalizing and saying, yes, I'm an artist.
Yeah. Well, okay, so there's a lot of interesting things to unpack here. Number one, okay, so being that I've never had a lot of like formal training in all these different art endeavors that I've done throughout my life. Things like special effects makeup. I've enjoyed special effects makeup. I've done what I would interpret as like pretty decent special effects makeup, but I'm not fully confident, especially coming to LA with a city full of special effects artists that have worked on films that I grew up with. It's like I can't confidently talk to those people, and
I
so
still can't either.
yeah, so I think it just depends on what you consider yourself like good at and knowledgeable about. I think that this is kind of why I end up learning more about a certain thing. And whether or not that's a good thing to be like, I want to feel good about speaking about a certain subject, so I need to learn more about it. Like I don't know, I guess that could only be a good thing, right?
No, Shane, it's not.
Well, I'm
You're an
like
awful
thinking,
person for wanting to learn things.
well, I'm like,
No,
well,
that makes
well, there's
complete
what's the
sense.
reasoning behind it? Is there
The reasoning is
is
you
there a
want
shallow
control.
reason?
You want
Yeah,
mental control over what it is that scares you. And maybe, I don't know if scares is the right word, but if you feel like you don't know something, then you feel like you
mm,
don't have control. So you're looking for control by trying to learn it.
right. Or just I don't want to be humiliated. So like sometimes you'll be in a crowd of people who all know about a certain thing, and you're the only one who doesn't know shit.
Hmm.
So then you end up kind of feeling foolish in this conversation. You remember that, that's definitely happened to me a lot. So then you're like, maybe I should learn about this thing so I don't feel foolish next time. But I don't know, we don't have to know everything, right? This is why like it's important to find your community of people, because you end up like learning stuff from each other. They're willing to share things like that. But in these like triggered moments of like some kind of shame or humiliation that ends up happening in these social settings, yeah, it's like not a good experience. So then you decide whether or not you want to expose yourself to that again, or be like around those people who, I don't know, sometimes people in certain communities don't really want to share. They don't want to include you in the conversation, and that might have to do with them, might have to do with like the energy that you're putting out in a conversation. Like if you're,
But
yeah,
more often than not, I find that in communities like this, people are more than willing to open up and share, especially
yeah,
when you ask questions.
mm,
And you brought up two things. So humiliation. I think fear of humiliation is probably one of the driving forces
for
between
sure.
lack of confidence. And the irony of it is, and you've said this too, most people are not experts. And for those that are, in what percentage of those people do you think are actually judging you? Because if somebody is an expert, from my experience, they're going to have enough compassion to know that they were once in the same position
Yeah.
that you were in. And if they
Well, that's
do
the hope.
exude, right, that's the and that's what I was
Some of
about to
them
say
are
too. Like
like
if they
they get
do,
like an ego
if they
trip
exactly. And
about it. Mm,
if the ego comes out, that's not even on you at that point. That's on
yeah.
them.
Mm,
And that's why confidence is such like a funny dance, because thinking about where lack of confidence comes from, how that shows up for you personally, I think that something I've done that's worked for me is when I feel these moments of insecurity, lack of confidence, fear of humiliation, I stop and I think about what the worst case scenario could be. And in my mind too, I try to figure out what it is that I'm so afraid of. So here's a perfect example. After we filmed my intro episode,
mm,
the next morning I woke up, that was so messy. I don't sound professional at all. I'm not going to deliver any information. This is not going to be
yeah.
useful to anybody. What if I
Mm,
didn't sound proper enough? And I just kept cycling through like these thoughts of like, what if, as if, and then I stopped myself and I was like, why do I feel this way? And in my brain, I tried to pull out the worst case scenario. And my worst case scenario was everyone who's listening is an expert and everyone who's listening is judging me. And the truth is, these worst case scenarios are probably the furthest thing from reality. But these are the things that we hold on to that create that sense of insecurity and discomfort. And then those are the things that might influence us to maybe not make decisions that could benefit us, like taking that job or putting your work on social media, which is a whole other can of worms that we could
mm-hmm.
open, because my lack of confidence stops me from posting on social media. And I know we've talked about that in the past, but this is like a whole other topic as well. And it's these little things. And in those moments where you aren't feeling sure, you're feeling like, is unconfident a word? I think it is, but it doesn't sound right for me to say
Are you
unconfident.
confident or unconfident about unconfident being a word?
I'm confident because I've heard the word used, but it doesn't
Mhm.
sound right to me. Anyways, when you're feeling unconfident, challenge yourself to think about why, and then process of elimination. Like, what is reality? What can I control? What's out of my control? And what really matters here? Because the truth is, no one's judging you under a microscope the way that you probably think you are. And I think that's like the overbearing fear or the umbrella that hangs over my head is what if people don't understand? What if I'm burdening people by putting my time in front of them or putting my work in front of them? What if nobody's going to care and I embarrass myself by putting myself out there? And at the end of the day, you should only be making what you're making for you anyways. And again, it contradicts like the note you made about how the cycle is complete when you share it with people, but it should start with what
should
will
leave with
fulfill
that
you.
intention. Yeah, you should
Right.
leave with the intention of doing what you feel is right for you. And the whole thing, with artwork is that like you're creating artwork for you with these themes that mean something to you with the hope that somebody else connects with that because
Exactly.
this is why I'm always just saying like we're all in the same boat, we're all at the same level, we're all going through this human thing called life and we're just trying to like navigate, and then sometimes you see little glimmers of hope that there's somebody else that feels the way that you do.
Exactly. And that brings up another point as well. I mean, sometimes when you're worrying so much about how you may appear to somebody who's potentially quote unquote judging you, you also don't think about the people who could be in another situation similar to you. Like in my case, I hate posting on social media. I have social media anxiety, but I know that in order to build your business and build your brand and get yourself out there, you have to promote yourself. And I recently posted on my story something about my Patreon. And I was like, oh, I'm such a burden. I'm annoying people. Nobody wants to see this. And a few minutes later, I get a message from somebody and he said, hey, your hustle inspires me. Like you putting your work out there is inspiring me to do this for myself. And he ended up making a Patreon, and like
Great.
that inspired somebody to create. And that's another angle of it too that I'd like to point out is you don't know who needs you or who could benefit from you putting yourself out there in that moment too. And that's arguably more important than the person that's judging you.
It definitely is for sure. And by the way, unconfident is a word according
Yeah, I
to
figured it was. It just
the
doesn't sound right.
dictionary. Yeah. What else could it be? Inconfident, disconfident.
Yeah.
It's
I'll,
definitely
I'll start
unconfident. I'm just
I'll start implementing unconfident in my vocabulary, but I'm going to
okay.
cringe every time.
But like you're saying, that whole idea that you just doing the thing and putting it out and reaching somebody that you didn't know you were going to reach is, in my opinion, the best part about everything that we do. The fact that this happened between you and I before you and I really
Mm-hmm.
started talking. You sent me a message about the sexism episodes,
Mm-hmm.
and what it inspired you to do. And that's the best thing ever. Like to have that kind of reaction over something that you just put out in the world and you're hoping somebody connects to. And then there is some kind of validation that somebody connected in that way. It's amazing. And especially with your artwork, because, the artwork that we're creating hopefully comes from a certain place. It's like you're pouring your heart out to the world in some way. So then for somebody to then be inspired and connected to that to me, is important. And so this is why, like, how people talk about Yelp reviews and they're just so negative and all these things. And people only take the time when they're really mad about something to speak up. But on the flip side of that, not enough people are taking the time when they're really inspired about something and they feel good about something. And in just this podcast alone, it's like rarely do I hear from people when something has really touched them, but then I'll hear like months later, they're like, oh yeah, weren't you talking about that on an episode of the podcast? Like that really spoke to me. And I'm like, oh, great. Like we end up like not hearing what people
Mm-hmm.
think, because they're just listening. And, it's not like we're constantly looking for feedback from people about these things, but it is a thing. So can we unpack a lot more of like the root you're talking about worst case scenarios. You're thinking about the worst thing that could happen. A lot of that is based in fear of humiliation, embarrassment, public humiliation, um, which is something I struggle with. I don't want to be publicly humiliated. I've been publicly humiliated many times. So, like, I remember all of those times that's happened. So, like, it impacts you, and you want to protect yourself, and you don't want to feel ashamed about a moment or something that happened. So then you end up in this kind of like paralysis of not doing anything, and it's caused from that fear, of those moments. You don't want any more of those moments of being embarrassed. So then you just, instead of like pushing forward, you end up just stopping, and this happens, it happens to me too, but I think what people have to keep in mind is being unapologetic about how you present yourself, because what we're talking about, like this external validation and people having their opinions about how you do things and trying to tear you down or anything like that, like a Yelp review, no matter what, somebody is going to have a problem with
Mhm.
how you're presenting yourself, how you're doing your thing. And this is why you have to keep in mind to seriously be unapologetic about how you put it out, how you want to present yourself and your artwork and things like that. And also, you don't have to explain yourself to anyone, period. You really seriously do not. You don't have to give people an explanation as to why you did the thing the way that you did it. And whether or not somebody has a problem with that, they're going to see themselves out. It's like they won't stick around because they have a problem with how you do things, and ultimately that just comes down to their opinion. And
Right.
I have plenty of opinions about people and things and how they do things, but unless they're asking me for my opinion because they care about my opinion does not matter at all relating to how other people do things.
Right.
It's just probably not how I do things. And there's plenty of things that I do in the way that I do them that I'm sure they'd look at and be like, I don't like how this is being done, you know?
Right. And in no world could you possibly please everybody. If you are, congratulations.
I
But
don't think it's possible.
I would like to challenge somebody who says they please everyone and ask them
Mhm.
if what they're putting out is fully authentic to them, because I really don't believe that it's possible to please everybody. And going back to fear too, nobody is immune to fear. I mean, whether you're just starting out like me and you have fears of literally just getting started. I mean, like I started painting probably a week ago, and the act of picking up the materials was like that was scary to me, you know? But the reason I'm mentioning that is wherever you are at in your life, there's going to be fear, and there're going to probably be new fears. And your fear is a physical manifestation of where you are at presently in your life and your career. So, for me to have fears about maybe like the smaller things with just getting started, once you work past that, you're going to have new fears. You're going to have new things to confront. And every one of those little fears is a doorway for you to push yourself forward and move on to the next challenge, because it is a challenge. I don't know how. Do you like games, Shane?
What kind of games?
Video games, strategy
I
games,
do.
board
Yeah.
games. So sometimes I like to think about these little roadblocks in my life as challenges, like in a game.
Mhm.
So it's like if I accomplish something and then a new situation presents itself, I look at it as like a new challenge unlocked. The point I'm making is if you are inclined to look at things as games and you enjoy games, consider your fears a challenge that you need to unlock. And once you
Yeah.
unlock that, you're going to step into a new place where you will have new fears. I don't believe, unless you're a sociopath, I don't believe you'll ever be fearless. There's always going to be new fears. But my point is, your fear is basically a reflection of where you're at and
Yeah.
what it is that you need to do to push past that. And I think that I wanted to talk about this because being a newer artist, or just getting to know, getting to learn more of this world, it's daunting, to think about like where should I be You know, how much should I know? What should
Wait, I would not consider you a newer artist. You've been doing art for a long time, just not specifically this medium. So
see how I
can
won't
we
allow
get that
myself
out
to
of
believe,
your,
yeah.
yes, out
No,
of your
but
vocabulary? Yeah.
see how like I will not allow myself to say I'm an artist. Like it's
Mm,
almost like this mental separation. And I talk to people, you know, when people come into my store and they look around at all of the art on the walls and on the shelves, they're like, oh, I wish I could be an artist.
mhm,
Or, you know, I wish I drew more. I wish I could start drawing more. And there's this mental roadblock that they put in place to stop themselves from actually pursuing it. And I think that a lot of that comes from a lack of confidence, obviously, but the fears and the challenges that are put in place in order to get to that next step. I mean, it just, you know, I'm not saying everyone who says like I want to draw more, I wish I did more art, like should want to be an
mhm.
artist professionally or should want to pursue that professionally, but it breaks my heart sometimes when people say like, "Oh, I really wanted to be an artist growing up and then I went to college, got a degree, got this other job." And maybe they didn't give themselves the credit or the faith to actually pursue something that in their heart they wanted to do.
Mhm.
Which kind of leads me into this other thing, and I'm thinking about like what can we do in those moments where we have challenges and roadblocks to push through when you truly aren't feeling confident.
Well, I really love that you're posing it like essentially like markers in life. Like the fear is the marker in life saying like this is where you're at and this is why you're having that fear. And once you push through that, there's going to be another set of markers of fears and things. In a similar fashion, this is doing a callback to the episode with Rick Kitagawa about imposter syndrome. He approaches imposter syndrome in a similar way where when that thing pops up, that imposter syndrome, it actually means it's actually a good thing because it's your brain trying to protect itself from something that's going to have the biggest gains in your life if you push past it, you know? So it's your brain is trying to tell you, it's trying to stop you because it's trying to protect you from this very scary thing, you know, like a new job or whatever it is. And you know, imposter syndrome and confidence and things like that all kind of tie in together with the fear and humiliation and things like that. Imposter syndrome is totally about humiliation as well. You know, you don't want to humiliate yourself in front of people who you perceive as experts in the thing that you want to know about or you want to seem smart about or you think you know like something about but you're not 100% confident about that thing. So it kind of all ties in to the same conversation. And just that idea that there are markers, there are things your brain sends you signals telling you like, whoa, you shouldn't do this thing because you're going to be humiliated is important to think about. That it's like the fear part of it is actually kind of a good thing. It's good that you are afraid of making a fool of yourself. You
Right,
know,
because it
like,
means you're not in your comfort zone. It means that
yeah.
you're either not in your comfort zone or you're preparing to be outside of your comfort zone.
But these are
I
the things
completely
that
agree.
you, once you achieve some of these things and you push past those markers, you'll start gaining some of that confidence surrounding that certain thing that you did, you know? So you end up just little successes equal much more confidence somewhere down the line about certain things. You got this. It's like you'll end up, it's like if you pick up a camera today, start taking photos, you're like, I don't understand f-stops and shutter speeds. And, you know, so then you learn, you spend the next 5 years working on it. You are going to be confident about it if you actually learn about it and you feel good about it and push past all the fear and stuff.
And isn't that funny how it all comes full circle too? You know, it's like let's say your starting point is your unconfidence and the your starting point is the lack of confidence. Once you acknowledge, challenge and defeat it, you now have a newfound confidence in the thing that you were once not confident about.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to acknowledge it and challenge it, because I like to use I don't know if this is an official thing, but it's like the 10% rule. And honestly, I'm going to dial this back down to the 1% rule. If you feel almost paralyzed because you're afraid to just start, and I'm not the only person that experiences this. I know this is a common feeling. You're afraid to start. Do one thing, one teeny tiny thing that puts you in that direction. So, for example, how I was afraid to start painting on canvas. This is something I mulled over in my head for probably like 6 months. I wanted to paint, but I was afraid to start. Go to the store and pick up a paintbrush. Go to the store and pick up one tube of paint. Read one thing about painting. And I think that thinking about this now, I think that expectation might play a role in fear and lack of confidence, and maybe the expectation you hold to yourself.
Right.
Try to let go of the expectation and just do it. Just do the one little thing that will push you in that direction without the expectation that you have to have something done, something very specific and grand done, because I think that's what hurts people too. And you've mentioned this in the past too, Shane, how it's like, be aware of what your practical realm of like attainability is, and don't set expectations so high for yourself that you're setting yourself up to fail.
Exactly. Right. Like what this is, obviously we talk about goals, and we talk about goal setting and setting them up for yourself and looking forward to achieving something. But this is the pitfalls of setting goals for yourself, especially when you set the goal so high that it's totally unachievable for you, especially with your skill set now. It's like, yes, I want to show art in a museum or something like that. Or I want to show art at the Louvre or whatever it is, like some crazy goal that isn't really realistic. And then you end up like disappointing yourself, And so like you just have to be aware that it's a thing. Like you can fall into this trap of like, oh yeah, I feel totally motivated today to set these goals for myself. But you really just have to be aware of where you're at, your skills, your knowledge, whatever it is, and just know that you might not be there yet, and it's okay to not be there. So then I'm not saying lower your standards. I'm not saying lower your standards, but at least be aware of where you're at. And
Right.
that's like the important part of that.
And on the same vein too, I'd like to add, be compassionate with yourself. And I'm going to quote you again, Shane, because
Oh God.
you were, it was something about you criticizing yourself, and you were saying like, don't, a friend said to you, don't talk to my friend like that. Like, think about
Right.
how, like, I'm just opening this up to whoever's listening. Like, think about how you speak to yourself, and if
Yeah.
you would find that acceptable to speak to another person, and really think about how that affects the way that you handle your fears or your ambitions or your expectations for yourself. And I'm saying that because if you would just take a step back and remember that you are human, and there is no person on this earth who becomes an expert overnight, the least you can do is be your own advocate and take those steps for yourself.
That is some sound advice.
Creative Conquest.
Rocky Angel says, finished a painting not yet posted and delivered it along with 5 others today for my show at Mothbelly Gallery, opening Thursday, March 3rd. Congrats on the show opening, Rocky. I know you've been working hard on that, so congratulations. That's awesome. Chris Bell says, oh, wow, so many this time. Gonna have a few posts here. I'm having a kick-ass article interview coming out about me and my art for March 2022. Very flattering. I finished a rework of one of my alcohol ink paintings in acrylic and oil mixed media. And I started on a new rework of an old alcohol ink painting in acrylic and oil mixed media. Not done yet. Chris, congratulations on all of those things. Starting some new work or reworking old work is always great. And congrats on the article. That's really cool. Reggie Cavalier says, got a song online, Spotify and YouTube, as well as made the drawing for and designed this cover mock-up for the release, and have a simplified version live for a t-shirt. This is something I wrote, played bass on, wrote lyrics, and did vocals, as well as produced the art. So I'm proud of it. Reggie, that's a big win. So congratulations. For those of you who are interested in hearing it, the band's name is Turbo Beast, and the song is called Hate. So go check that out. If you guys want to share your creative conquests with us, you can find us on the Drawing from Experience creative community on Facebook, and you can start sharing today. And now back to the show. You know what I'd really like to do as far as like an exercise right now? I kind of want to unpack a little bit of why you personally feel like unconfident about art and things like that, or whatever it is that you feel unconfident about. Also in myself, but also like the things also we feel confident about and why we feel confident about that. And then we can apply those things, those same principles to the things we feel unconfident about. And then maybe, in a few months or something like that, we can come back, circle back around to this topic and see if we feel better about some of those things.
I love that. And where can people do that? Where can we all come together and share the things that we're not confident about
It's almost
and hold
like
ourselves accountable?
you would hope that there'd be some kind of like community somewhere
Yeah.
on like the internet. All
A
right.
place where people can actually share their work too and like
It'd be
ask questions
amazing.
to each other.
Maybe like a work in progress Wednesday, or like celebrate their victories on a Sunday.
Yeah.
That would be
How
great if
cool would
there was
that
a
be if there was,
place.
yeah, just a designated group for artists to come together and be vulnerable and also share their creative conquests?
Mm-hmm. This
Like
is
what kind of place do you think exists like that?
It's almost like you would need something like a creative community to do that in.
Yes.
This is our big commercial for the Drawing from Experience creative community. And this is a place that we've been having a lot of discussions on how we want to make it more valuable for people to be in there and be part of the community and connect and things like that. And part of that ties into this conversation that we're having about confidence. And what we are going to might as well we since you brought it up, we might as well just say we are going to be putting some of these topics and kind of like calls to action about these things that we're talking about, and try to engage the community in a different way on different days and things like that. So if you are part of the community, thank you. You're awesome. If you're not part of the Drawing from Experience creative community, find us on Facebook. We are there and we're chatting and we're talking about art and we're sharing art and we're celebrating each other's victories. So
And if there's any single goal I would like to see come out of not only the element of community, but especially when it comes to social media, when we think about the places where we show up and we present our work, we're also in that community sense. It's like we're presenting the best versions of ourselves. And if at the very least, I want to see people peel those layers back and feel comfortable being open. I believe that when people peel back that layer of perfection and they share those work in progress moments or creative conquests and go as far as opening up about things that didn't go so well, I think that this eliminates that layer of feeling like you need to now step up because everyone else looks like they're doing so well. And I think especially as creatives, we spend a lot of time alone anyways, and I'd love to see a place where people are being open and communicating and kind of knocking down that veil of needing to be perfect at all times.
well, I think it's happening. And this is something, as far as like the imperfection, the not as pretty Instagrammable moments of your life. This is something I do actually like to concentrate on as well. Like the past creative conquest, what I posted in there honestly was like, this past week has been ups and downs. I talked about my mental health with my doctor. I had dropped off work at a gallery. They asked me to have a featured show later in the year. So it's literally like just like on opposite sides of the spectrum. And I enjoy sharing the rejections and the things that aren't as pretty, or curated for social media, because it shows people that like whatever your perception of me is, I am going through the same shit that you are. I'm having the same problems, financial difficulties at times, all the difficult things. And I think it's important that people do share that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we're all human and we are all pursuing our own goals as individuals, as human. And I think that people opening up and bringing that together is going to create a place where other people feel more comfortable asking questions and seeking help and mentorship and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah. So getting back to the topic here, you are feeling unconfident because you're just entering you're trying to get into the gallery world and show your art publicly, paint on a canvas, hang it up on a wall. Would you say that that's your biggest, as far as art goes, that's your biggest like unconfidence topic?
Ooh, you're grilling me personally.
You
Um,
personally? Yeah.
I think that I have a similar when it comes to like I think that education is a great basis for saying, I know something about something, or I went to school to learn about this, and therefore I have knowledge. And I think
Mm.
that without the education involved as well, with the art world being so open and diverse, I think that also the lack of proper education is probably what contributed to my lack of confidence. But logically, I know that these aren't elements and variables that should be dictating like how I carry myself in terms of confidence. It's like I know consciously that just because I didn't go to art school doesn't mean I can't learn and grow and experience whatever it is I'm trying to get to on my own.
Mm.
And that's why confidence is just such a funny, it's like a
There
little
is no
demon.
logic. Yeah, well, there with a lot of things in life, your emotions and things, how you're feeling about a certain thing, have almost nothing to do with logic at all. It's actually like the opposite. Like we try to make sense of things, but some things just don't make sense. Like why we feel a certain way about it. There is no logic,
Hmm.
and so we end up like feeling really emotional about certain things, and all the logic is out the window. So like that part of it, we can step back and look at a certain situation and logic it out and know why we feel a certain way, but it still doesn't really fully explain it.
Hmm. Human condition.
Yeah. So what was your answer to that?
I think lack of knowledge and lack of experience.
Okay.
And then like diving like head first into a world where I now have to build a profession on it. I think that's the scariest element of it. And I think that when I look forward at goals, I think the fear of the unknown is what fuels the lack of confidence. So the lack of confidence is already there as a foundation, but then when I try to apply certain ideas to how I'm going to play all of this into my future, I think the fear of unknown and the uncertainty plays a huge role too, and I think that's a really common feeling.
I would agree, but also that can also be used as the motivation. The
Absolutely.
uncertainty, the not knowing what's going to happen is exciting. Like this can be an exciting thing as opposed to something that's scary. So that's kind of how I approach it. Like I love thinking that I don't know everything that's going to happen, because what ends up happening is you end up getting these opportunities that you didn't even know existed until you put yourself out. And this is why, like, you go to a gallery, you meet people, you talk to them about what you do, you connect over something, and then like 6 months later you get this opportunity because you had that conversation at that gallery. So the uncertainty is that this is why I'm always saying on the podcast, like, the long game is the most important thing in this entire industry, because we're constantly building that. We're over and over and over, because you have no idea where it's going to lead. So that to me is motivating. Like I like the idea that there is a lack of certainty of what your future is going to be, because ultimately, if I knew what my future was going to be, I'm not sure if I'd want it. Like I don't know if I'd want it in the same way, because it's like that thing that I'm trying so hard to do or be, it never really looks as appealing when you get it. And so like you can have an idea of what success is. What does success look like to you? You're showing at the Louvre or whatever. Whatever it is that you think success is, there's always going to be more. This is why I'm, in kind of a negative way, I'm always saying like it's never enough. We never have enough. And it's not necessarily like a greedy thing. You're just like, once you achieve results and you reach a goal, there's always another goal. There's always another thing. I mean, you could, if you show your work at the Louvre, that might be the last thing you do. It might be the most wonderful thing, and you might just hang up your hat. But chances are you're still going to want to do something else past that. And that something else might not be another museum. It might be, I want to teach my child how to paint. And like the success ends up being like that you passed on knowledge.
Right.
So it's completely, it's up to you. And like just that uncertainty of like not knowing where the success leads, or what your perception of success is, how that changes over time and everything. And it's that part of it is motivating. Like I think it's actually good. Like I think it can be a good thing.
I agree.
So with all of that, then what are the things that you are confident about when you have those moments like you personally, Stefania, like what are the things where you have just like unwavering confidence about?
Hmm. These questions. When it comes to confidence and thinking about how I apply that, I think it goes back to when I feel or know that I'm benefiting somebody else in some way, I think it gives me that confidence and the ability to ignore those unknown elements or the things that make me feel afraid, because there's something in me that wants to instill confidence in other people, and I wonder if that comes from a place of me not wanting other people to feel the way I do in some ways with lack of confidence. And I think that's why I'm drawn to working with kids, especially in the arts. And I think that's why I'm drawn to working with people who I can help elevate in some way. So, to answer your question, what makes me feel confident? I feel the most confident when I know that I've helped somebody else.
What topic specifically do you feel confident? Like if I was going to be like, hey, can you explain this to me? Whatever, what if I said, explain anything you want to me? What do you know the best? What is it that you're
See,
just like, this is what I know about?
yeah, that's a tough question, because the question, what do you know the best? It's almost like, what do I believe I know everything about? And I
Mhm.
know that I don't know
You don't
everything,
need to
no
know
matter what
everything, but just
topic.
what do you know a decent amount enough that you can speak about it confidently?
I feel pretty comfortable with sculpture. I think I've grasped it enough to understand form and trying to achieve certain goals within creating forms and use of tools. I have a pretty good grasp on that. So I would say that, like, in situations where I'm teaching and working with people, I feel the most confident when I'm like showing them how to use those tools or how to use
Mhm.
the work with the clay. And it's those little moments where I can like just like sit next to them and just guide them, and
How
watch
about
the thing click.
how about when you're speaking to a veteran sculptor? How do you feel then?
Well, I can't say I've spoken to a whole lot of veteran sculptors, but
Mhm.
I'm sure my confidence would be a lot smaller in those situations. I don't know if I'd speak. I don't know if I'd even, going back to like when we were talking about calling yourself an artist, I think I wouldn't be as open about how passionate I am with sculpture for like those human reasons of like, I know I'm not the master. I know I'm not the expert in the room.
Yeah,
If that answers your question. I don't know. I
it
don't know how I would
does.
behave in those
Yeah.
situations. I know that I wouldn't be as confident. I'm most confident when I feel like I'm helping somebody else.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm asking is just to see if there's a way that you can kind of harness whatever it is that you do feel confident about and like let that feeling of being confident and apply that to things that you are not confident about. And I think the way to do that would be to unpack why you feel confident about it. And it really, a lot of times, comes down to knowledge. It really does. Like it comes down to your learning about the specific thing and whether that's academically or not. The reason we feel a certain way about being quote self-taught and being a little unconfident about that is because it's not in an academic sense. So like at least that's why it's that way for me, why I feel a little unconfident about speaking about certain things. The way that I kind of like get through some of that is I'm just like my defense mechanism or whatever it is basically like this is how I do it. I'm not saying that this is the way you need to do it, but I will explain to you how I do it. And it's kind of a good way to get through it and still speak confidently about what you do, because what I do is not going to be the same thing that somebody else does. Even if we achieve similar results in the end, it's going to be different. So I can confidently say that this is what I do because this is literally what I do. So like you, whether or not you have to give a disclaimer at the beginning to make yourself feel a little bit better about when you're explaining the thing that you do, I think that's fine. I think it's fine to be like, hey, I didn't learn in school, but this is how I do it, is enough to show people that like they're not going to be questioning whether or not I learned this in school. If I let them know right off the bat that I'm self-taught and I learned from looking at paintings and talking to other artists and then just trying it. So like Yeah, so I think that comes a lot down to the knowledge of whatever the subject is. So when you are unpacking that, when you're trying to figure out why you're unconfident about certain things or why you're confident about other things too, for me personally, this does relate back to like my childhood, and as I grew up and continued to do creative things and getting some of that praise or at least respect from people that I was knowledgeable about a certain thing. It had to do a lot with like essentially being like bullied at a young age, not wanting to feel like I was less than anybody, and then almost like gaining superpowers along the way of like, I have a skill that other people don't have, so leave me alone, like, so it was kind of just like art has always been a way for me to make friends and a way for me to show people that like don't push me around. I have these other things that you don't have, so I should be pushing you around, so it's like I don't know, like if it is a defense mechanism, I'm not sure, but part of that was probably motivated by the fact that I didn't want to be bullied. I didn't want to be pushed around by other people, and that I was special in a certain way. And as far as like acting and speaking confidently, a lot of that as I was growing up into my 20s, I owned a photography company. I had jobs that were like weddings and things like that, or even just like a portrait of somebody in a room and it's just the two of you. You have to, as the photographer, it teaches you like very quickly how to speak to people in a certain way to put them at ease because they believe you know what you're doing. And in photography, you have to make a connection with the person that you're photographing in such a way that it puts them at ease and they're not doubting that you're going to take a crappy photo. And especially like times 10 at a wedding when you're not just dealing with one person, you're dealing with a family and they're paying you a whole bunch of money and you want to make them feel like you do know what you're doing. They made the right choice. They're spending the money in the right place, and people pick up on whether or not you're confident in those situations really quickly, and then for the rest of the day, if your confidence has wavered at some point and somebody picked up on that, they're going to treat you like crap for the rest of the day. So I learned pretty quickly how to speak to people to right off the bat show them that I know what I'm doing. I'm confident about it. I can take control of a situation. I can get the desired results, and you're going to be happy with the final product, and you can
Right.
do that with body language and the way you speak and eye contact and things like that. So when you're in those like higher pressure situations, you learn really fast,
Hmm.
when you just kind of jump in and start doing it, but this is why like a lot of people stop doing wedding photography. They're like, it's way too much pressure, because the pressure is ultimately it comes down to whether those people, number one, like what you deliver them in the end, if they like your photos. But number two, it's like, how do you behave on that day? Like the actual wedding day when you're actually taking the photos, how are you behaving? If you show up and you're just like this unconfident person, you're like fumbling around with all of your gear and you don't know and you're never prepared to take the right shot, they're not going to trust you, they're not going to feel comfortable in front of your camera, so that for me was like a huge like learning process of how to portray myself as a confident person.
Right. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying too. It's like people can sense when you aren't comfortable or aren't confident. And that's why I separate the two between like your outward confidence and your inward confidence, because when it comes to outward confidence, I exactly what you were saying in my case as well, working with the public, being a makeup artist, having to play a role and be confident that you can do your job. If people sense that you can't do that job, they will eat you alive, and it'll make the experience on both of your ends so much more difficult to navigate. And it's that's I think that's mechanically an easier thing to adopt when you put yourself in positions where you have to work with the public. It almost kind of teaches you how to show confidence. But when it comes to the inward confidence, I really want to talk about that because it's something that you can kind of hide from the world. And in some small ways, it may change the way that you behave towards yourself and talk to yourself and pursue your own goals. You know, whereas with the outward confidence, it's almost like a instant gratification, because if you show the confidence, you do the job well, then you'll have a positive outcome from the situation. But I think it just goes to show too how whether you're faking it or, you know, working on that and you acknowledge it, I think that working in the direction of finding that confidence can only help promote more positive situations for yourself.
That is some really good insight. And so that's funny because it tracks like what you're saying about that outward confidence versus the inward, because my whole path was really like defined a lot by how other people perceive me, you know, rather than like necessarily how I perceive myself. But I think also, you know, that inward confidence, that ultimately has to come first. You know, you have to explore that and like how you actually feel about a subject and if you can do it. So like whether or not you are faking it, like you're saying, that mentality could at least, like, when you're reflecting on the inward confidence of whether or not you feel good enough to speak about a subject or fill a certain role, I feel like the outward confidence could benefit from you doing the inward work, you know, and going along with this idea of this outward confidence and reaping the benefits of what comes out of that about being confident in public or in your industry or anything like that. Specifically speaking to a woman, female bodied individual in an industry, you and I spoke very briefly on your introductory episode about being a woman in the industry. Also, the perception of women being a confident woman out in the world is much different than a confident man out in the world, because unfortunately it is. And this idea of just like a confident woman being perceived as like a threat, or she's pushy, or whatever people say about that, is very different than like a confident man, me being a confident man out in the world, and then people treating me like, oh, he's got his shit together, versus a woman who can be perceived completely differently. And this is like totally unfair. And like, we need to be thinking about this. This is a thing that, so like, if you end up having these thoughts, as anybody out in the world, men and women have these thoughts about a confident woman out in the world, we need to be unpacking that and thinking, why do we think that? You know, and like, so have you experienced this as a woman, as a female bodied human out in the world? You show up to something and you're like, I got this. Have you gotten pushback from that, from being that way?
So when I'm working on a job, whether I'm teaching, working in film, or whatever it is, I bring forth my most professional self. And it's basically just the version of me that's making sure that I'm doing my job right. And I haven't attached this to being a woman, but I receive comments all the time about how serious I am, or I've been called like I know that it's a common thing to be considered bitchy if you're assertive. I wouldn't consider myself a bitchy person at all.
Yeah.
But if I see that there's something that's not quite right within like the dynamic of the workplace, or if I believe that there's problems that solutions can be worked to, I've been like, a lot of people have made comments about me being like too stoic or too serious, and I'm wondering if it's because there was an expectation. I mean, like, I'm a short, petite, blonde girl, and I genuinely don't believe I exhibit any behavior that's overly bitchy or overly assertive, but I think that sometimes people are taken aback when I am like serious on a job, and I receive more comments about my behavior because of that.
That's interesting, that seriousness. So people don't, what is it like? People don't like you being serious and professional?
I don't think that they don't like it, but I all the time I receive comments, you're so serious. You're so serious. You're so aggressive. And I genuinely, like, anyone who knows me in real life knows I'm not an aggressive person. And when I am at work, I am more professional. But when I say professional, I just eliminate like the curse words that I sprinkle in real life and a little bit of my humor. So it's really just a more serious version of me, but it's always like, "Oh, you're so serious." Like you're so yeah, I'm trying to think of specific situations, and it's honestly not, I wouldn't say that I'm picked on or called out for behavior at work, but I think that going back to what you're asking about being a female in a workplace, I think that I've gotten the impression that there's an expectation of what my behavior should be like or might seem like, and I think that the expectation is a less serious version of who I am when I am working, and people tend to point that out. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I haven't received like a lot of negative comments from people. I have had your typical comments where someone, says something about like from inappropriate people,
Hmm.
but I think in the general umbrella of like how I'm treated in the workplace, I think that the biggest comment is like about how serious I am
Hmm.
or how stoic I am. And I'm trying to remember the right words people have used in the past. A lot of people, like when I was a teacher at the cosmetology school I went to, I guess there was like this air of like intimidation because I was so serious. And I just wonder if it's because people were expecting me to be a little bit more bubbly and friendly, because
Hmm.
I don't know if there's an assumption that like because of my appearance I should be more friendly or bubbly or laughing, but when I do work I am very serious. So and I think that a lot of people are taken aback by that.
Would you change that about
No.
your? Okay, good
Never.
answer. That is a great answer.
It's like if my behavior offends you, that's a you problem. I'm doing my job and I'm making sure I do my job well.
Hmm.
And that's why too, like I do think there is some substance to it, because like on a job I don't think there's a necessity to comment on my behavior.
Yeah.
It's not relevant, it's not necessary, and it doesn't contribute to the work we're doing. So I will say that maybe it does have
Unless
something
it's
to do with
disruptive.
me.
Unless it's
Right.
disruptive or you're being disrespectful to people
Exactly.
or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have these discussions with people about whether or not gender plays a role in how people treat you. We know that it does in a lot of ways. We've seen it. We've all seen it in some way. We've all maybe even felt it ourselves, and then again, we have to like unpack this. We have to figure out why we have that bias or something like that. A lot of it is rooted in the idea that women are supposed to fall in line. They're supposed to listen and act, as opposed to being the ones doing the speaking. And the confident women are the ones doing the speaking. So I just, all the confident women out there, keep fucking kicking ass. Keep doing that. Like, I love seeing that. Like a confident badass woman is the best. It's great, especially in a room full of men, because it just throws them for a loop, and it's the best because we're just taught otherwise, which is terrible. And so anyway, so I just wanted to bring that up, and I wanted to just talk about that a little bit, if that has anything to do with your confidence specifically, Stefania.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I second what you say too. I mean, I mean, if you're perceiving this from the way you should, which is that a person is confident, you shouldn't feel anything less than elevated or supported in the presence of somebody who's confident. So I second what you say, and yeah, that's all I have to
Yeah.
say about that.
One last thing, at least on in my story, as who I am as a quote confident person, and I've talked about this on the podcast before as well, is the perception that confidence sometimes is arrogance. And in the past, I've had moments where people, I would say, mistake my confidence as arrogance. And also, there have probably most definitely been times where I have been arrogant. And so, like, I've had these moments of like trying to figure out where the line is between confidence and arrogance. And like, is arrogance like gloating about how well it's like the mansplaining, being there and showing up and impressing your knowledge upon everyone, like that. There is a delicate balance of doing that or being respectful in the way that you're speaking to people about a subject, and showing up and being confident about it. And sometimes it's hard when you're in a position of power and you don't know exactly who's in the room or who's there that knows all this stuff and probably knows more than you know, and then you show up and you're explaining yourself or you're explaining a subject to people. So there's, I don't know, like, where
Where's
do you
the
think
line
the
drawn?
line is for that?
So when I think of confidence and arrogance, I see two words with a line in between. And to be honest, I feel like that line sits in a different place for everyone, because I think that arrogance comes down to, well, first when I hear the word arrogance, it sounds like there's a negative connotation attached to it, whereas with confidence it has a more positive connotation. So I would say that arrogance really comes down to the perception of the person receiving whatever behavior it is from the other. And I would say maybe if you receive that person's confidence as insulting, you may perceive that as arrogant. But I think that the determining factor is hard to say, because I think again it relies on how that person's perceiving them, and if what the confident person is saying really is insulting.
Yeah, and it might be because you're triggering their lack of confidence,
Yes,
you
I
know, or
agree.
something, you're
Yep.
flagging something in them, and they're like, oh, well, screw this person, you know, because they think they know so much about this subject, you know, and then they're perceiving it as them being arrogant.
And that's not to say that there are people who float around on this earth who do exude arrogance, because and it's almost like a defense mechanism.
Mm,
But when we're talking about the distinction between confidence and arrogance, I would say that line sits with the person who receives it.
mm,
And even if something does appear arrogant, I would give the other person the benefit of the doubt, because when you're talking, first of all, to even speak, I mean, public speaking alone, hello, that's what we're doing right now.
mm,
You need to have confidence to speak, and
yeah,
when you are building that confidence, nobody's perfect, and the way that words come out can sometimes be brought out in a less perfect way. And I'm not saying it's okay to say the wrong thing and have it be insulting, but I think that if your goal is to listen to somebody with an open mind and they aren't trying to be arrogant, then maybe you need to check in with yourself and see why that seemed arrogant to you.
yeah. So you're saying give people a margin for error for just being human
With reason. Give
with
people a
reason.
margin for error with reason. If it's not outwardly insulting and you feel like they're arrogant, and that's the word, is if it feels arrogant, check
Mm,
in with yourself and see if what this person is saying is truly insulting. I'm not an advocate for arrogant people. I'm just thinking from a position of how could this be seen from one person to another, and why might somebody be considered arrogant? Because I agree with what you're saying too when you say that sometimes it's almost like a fear is triggered in someone's mind or in their heart if they're seeing somebody else speak confidently. And that's kind of like the devil's advocate that I'm playing here, is like maybe like that triggered a fear for you, and you kind of have to check in to see if this person really was being arrogant.
yeah, I kind of feel like we need to check in with ourselves all the time because
So the
we,
takeaways from this, I would say a big takeaway from this episode is check in with yourself. But
yes,
like most importantly too, I think that if there's anything too that I want people to take away from this, it's just to be kind to yourself. Allow yourself to feel fear and acknowledge it, and do what you can with that information in a way that will benefit you. Meaning, go buy that material to do that craft or that thing that you're afraid to do, or open a conversation with somebody you're intimidated by. Whatever that looks like to you.
that is some wonderful advice, Stefania. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. This has been great. I really
Yeah, I think this has
appreciate
been a good conversation.
your perspective.
I think that what's fun about our conversations again is that I believe that we're on very different ends of the spectrum in terms of how we perceive and like exhibit certain traits, and like
Yeah,
we're very similar as people, but we're very polar opposite in some ways. And
yeah,
confidence was an interesting one to me. When I asked you in the past, I was like, how do you find your confidence? Your response was so wildly opposite to how I handle my own issues with confidence, and it's just really interesting to bounce these perspectives back and forth.
yeah. And I'm gonna echo what you said, and basically like literally showing up and doing one step at a time and just trying to figure it out little by little and being kind to yourself and having some grace and just realizing that you're not going to have all the answers and it's okay to not have all the answers. And confidence is built over time. through a lot of trial and error and a lot of embarrassment, not wanting to feel embarrassment, not wanting to be humiliated publicly, all of those things tied up into a human turn into being unconfident or being confident. And if you want to work towards the confidence, you have to push through some of those really difficult emotions to get there. But at the end of the day, if you are an artist and you're listening to this podcast and trying to gain confidence in your own work, you first and foremost just have to show up and do it. Just that act alone on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, however much time you actually have to make your art, that act of actually showing up and doing it will build it by itself, amongst a million other things. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, which I hope you did, you should go right now to Spotify and iTunes, and you should give us a rating and a review, and we would highly appreciate that. And other people will appreciate that as well, because we will get more listeners. More people will be able to listen in on these conversations we're having with each other and with artists from all over the world. So you can stream and download previous episodes on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or our website, drawingfromexperience.com. Find us on Facebook at the Drawing From Experience Creative Community and start sharing your work in there. You can also find us on Instagram at DFE Podcast or our Patreon at patreon.com/drawingfromexperience. And where can people find your personal art, Stefania?
My personal work can be found on Instagram as instagram.com/Stefania Mederios_. And you can also find me on Patreon at patreon.com/Stefania Mederios.
Did you add the underscore because there's another Stefania Mederios out there?
There is.
Oh.
I think that's why. That has to be why. I know the underscore is unsightly.
I'm just curious. And you can find my personal art at shaneizykowski.com or patreon.com/Shane Izykowski or my Instagram at Shane Izykowski Artist. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you can find some inner confidence and outward confidence, all of the things. We want all the confidence for you out there.
And guys, if you feel so inclined, come hang out with us on the Drawing From Experience Creative Community Facebook page, which we were talking about, and share with us. I challenge you to share with us some things you would like to work on with your own confidence. Let's start a discussion. Let's do this.
Love it. See you guys there. Bye-bye. The Drawing From Experience podcast is co-produced by me, Shane Izykowski, and Stefania Mederios, with editing by me, and support coming from our Patreon at patreon.com/drawingfromexperience. And our sponsors. If you'd like to be a sponsor, you can contact us at dfepodcast@gmail.com.